Thank you. I should warn you that I have severe ADHD, and that may result in my speaking quickly, possibly too quickly. If that happens, please somebody throw something at me, preferably something soft. Also, my French is very limited. Oui, non, son los baños. So, the name of this talk is meant as a teaser, but it's also meant to be thought-provoking. People say, the myth of culture. What the hell does he mean by that? And for established organizations, and I'm speaking primarily of organizations relating to open software, often the old-timers say, why are things the way they used to be? What's gone wrong? And I want to address that and indicate some of the things that can cause things to go wrong. As you can tell, it's not behind me, it's over there. My presentation is not flowery. I don't use a lot of fancy graphics. It's pretty bare bones. Whoops. Don't know how that got in there. Those are my cats. Fabulous Small Prize and Butterscotch Ripple. All right, what is culture? No, not that kind of culture. Culture, in this case, is a collection of beliefs, ethics, morals, behaviors, unanimously and consensually, that's key, agreed upon by a group. Now you may notice that there are a couple of words missing there that you might expect, like trust, and that's because some cultures are toxic, and trust doesn't really factor in. Think chaotic evil. Actually more lawful evil because they have a structure. Okay. Now, and those of you who are not familiar with the term consensual, it means everybody is in agreement and they approve of it. And that is important. I will come back to that later. And how does a culture form? Probably in as many different ways as there are cultures. I'm sure you've heard that, well, there are 43 people in the room and there are 45 opinions. So, same basic deal. Each person, you know, you can, in Life of Brian, everybody say with me, everybody's different. Well, I'm not. But for our purposes, let's assume that this culture we're going to look at grows out of the informal ways that a small group of people with common goals have figured out how to work together effectively, not stepping on each other's toes, making compromises, and basically defining rules of engagement between each other and with people outside of their group. Now, why did I say culture is a myth? That was a trick question. It's not really a myth. The myth is that once you've established a culture, you know, like that small group of people that created the startup, you know, they've got their way. It's their culture. The myth is that once that has been established, it is perpetually and immutably the same. Once adopted, it'll stay that way with no more effort required. And that's the myth. Cultures, like anything else that are worthwhile, require attention and work. Our small group of people here forged their culture together, hammering out details, compromises, and expectations of each other until they were comfortable working with each other. It probably didn't happen in a day, but they came up with something that was comfortable. Now, if whatever they're working on was popular, it's likely that they're going to add people, add additional participants. Now, what threatens cultures of this sort? Curiously enough, some of the buzzwords you hear in business are big threats, like growth and diversity and going public. And others are sacrificing control in return for something, and I will get to that. Dilution of specific aspects of the culture, meme. And it's not pleasant to talk about, but assume that some of the people that were there at the founding got in the way of a stampede of buses. Okay, they've dropped out. They're no longer keepers of the flame, as it were. So it's up to others to maintain the culture. Have I put anyone to sleep yet? Raise your hand if you can't hear me. Very good. All right, we have someone with a sense of humor. The rest of you. Okay. So, why can growth be a threat? As new people become part of the group, they're presented with the culture as a fait accompli. The culture has been forged, the anvil's cold, and they had no part of working it out. They have no intrinsic investment in the culture. They weren't part of the compromise and back and forth that formed it. So that's an issue, because it's something that's being imposed on them, and that needs to be turned around. And each new person that comes in has a unique background that does not include the new culture and may, in fact, occasionally be in conflict with it. You know, for instance, an open software group may end up having somebody from some incredibly closed stack organization wanting to get involved, and that can cause conflicts, particularly between, not necessarily between the individual and the group, but between the individual's employer and the group. Does it all make sense so far? Does anybody think this is foolishness? Good. How about diversity? There's another big buzzword these days. Well, having diversity as a goal introduces many of the same problems, but with a slightly different slant. It depends on how diversity is defined. In some cases, diversity is defined as, equal parts male, female representation from societies globally. And so some of the areas of confusion not only can be in employment background or that sort, but language. Someone for whom frequently new groups form their culture, they're all either co-located or at least geographically have the same backgrounds. Like, for instance, they all speak English or they all speak German as their native tongue. And as other people come in, somebody from a completely different culture, like India or the Far East, not only is unlikely to have the original group's primary language as their primary language, but words may have different meanings for them. Their behaviors may be different. For instance, in some countries, it's considered rude to raise hands and ask questions during a presentation. Now, in the US, the hell with that, people will raise hands at any time. I won't say anything about the last election. Well, it should have been flags, not hands. And so your confusion can come from language, it can come from social background, and even temporal displacement. We've become accustomed to instant gratification in communication. Texting, email, chats, but as a group gets larger, the probability of you knowing where your correspondents are located geographically goes down. So you send out a question and you wait, and you wait, and you wait, and you don't hear anything. And meanwhile, you're getting a little more antsy about, why the hell isn't he answering me? Well, it turns out he lives on the other side of the planet and he's asleep. So bear in mind and embed 24 hours into your expectation, at least 24 hours, into your expectation of a reply, unless you know the guy's in the next queue. If you give him 24 hours, you probably should give him a bonk on the head. How about going public? That's often a big thing. Why do we want to go public? Because we want to be rich. Well, if you go public, you are suddenly, you acquired a whole new set of masters over whom you have very little control and influence, such as government regulators, stockholders. Oh, watch out for them buggers. And any external appointees. Stockholders may have the power to appoint members to the board, and those members may not share the culture. That's not necessarily a good thing. In fact, it's probably not. How about sacrificing control? That's another thing I mentioned as a threat to cultures. Even if you don't go public, you might end up with outsiders involved. You might get funding to further your work and your research, but in order to get that, you had to trade away a seat or two on your board of directors, or stock options should you ever go public. And recent history is full of ways and how that has gone south. As an example, look up Ars Digita and Philip Greenspun and see what happened to him, according to his own account. Basically, his company was taken away from him by the venture capitalists. Now, I confess to a certain lack of enthusiasm about venture capitalists, but that's because I've never had a startup, so I would probably kiss their feet if I did. Okay, what did I mean by dilution? Remember I said dilution of the culture? Well, in the first couple of slides when I defined what is culture, you may have noticed, or you may not have noticed, depending on how much coffee you've had, that the components were all specified in the plural, a set of ethics, morals, behaviors, and dilution occurs when, for one reason or another, such as expediency or ignorance is one of the biggest things to guard against, some subset of the group stops obeying, stops following all of the tenets. They say, okay, well, we're supposed to run this by so-and-so, but he's on vacation, so we'll just do it anyway. And that becomes a habit. Okay, well, there's one of the rules, as it were, that has now become the norm rather than the exception. And if it's a large group with multiple organizations, they may have conflicting conflicting subsets of the overall cultural rules that they're following. So you ask one person, you get, what is the culture? You ask another person in a different subgroup, and they may give you a totally different answer. Again, something to guard against. There is, or at least there was, well, put it this way, I've been with the Apache Software Foundation for years. I was one of the founders. I've been with Apache since before 1996. And for years, Amazon has listed a book called The Apache Way, to be published soon. And it has bounced around through a number of authors, myself included, for several years. I don't think it has actually yet made it to print because it's so damned hard to put into print, to codify. I mean, the people who were there at the beginning, we understand what the Apache Way is when it was just the web server. Well, now the Apache Software Foundation has over 100 top-level projects, and I don't know how many are still in incubation, and thousands of contributors, and that means there's tremendous potential for all of these things to be affecting the Apache way, the Apache culture. All right, and what do you do? Suppose you have a culture. You've got a group of people and you like the way you work together, but you want to get more people involved, but you don't want to lose that special spark that makes your group you. Now, Thomas Jefferson wrote that the tree of liberty is a culture of liberty, being free. He wrote that the tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of tyrants and patriots. That's probably a little extreme for a startup. So let's find something a little less extreme. And one of the ways to defend your culture is, as people come on board, make sure that they become invested in the culture. Remember I said something about consensual back at the beginning? It means they agree, they understand what the culture is, and they agree that they want to be part of it and abide by it. And make sure they're on board with that before you actually let them, write any code, for instance. And that basically sounds like some sort of indoctrination course, but it's really mentoring. Somebody who is interested in your project really, and wants to contribute, really deserves a mentor from somebody who's already there, who understands how things work, who understands the culture, and can inculcate respect for that culture in the person wanting to come on board. Okay. Any questions from any of this? Wow. Either everybody is stoned out of their minds, or I am being as lucid as I've ever been. Mark the Okay, snow event. All right, here are some specific ways. Once you've hammered out, remember I talked about the initial group hammered out their culture, codify it, write it down. Every little thing, such as email on private, between individuals or on private mailing lists, will not be shared outside of the original set of correspondence without permission. Everyone will be treated with respect, no ad hominem attacks, et cetera, processes for how, doesn't have to get down to the details of, this is how we're going to approve code commits, but you can do that in a slightly higher level by saying that commits to code, new commits to code require the approval of someone who's, by new people, needs to be approved by someone who's been there for a while, who can make sure that it's sane and fits in with the coding style or whatever. I realize I'm speaking from the point of view of a coding group rather than something else. That's my background, so sue me. Make sure that new people, write it down, spell it out, make it clear, reference it a lot. Make sure that it's prominently displayed on your web pages. And make sure that anybody who is interested in contributing has to go through that page before they can get to the details. Make sure that any people that you add have bought into it, have consented to live under the rules of the culture. And if it's not too late, put some stuff in there about how to deal with problems. And if your culture's been around for a while, modifying it can be difficult, but if you say after the third remonstration from the board of directors for ad hominem attacks, stuff like that. Put in something that gives the group the teeth to kick out overly disruptive influences. Okay. And unless you're building a toxic culture, emphasize trust. Trust in each other, that other people in the group will do the right thing. Okay? I had something else here about defending your culture. What was it? Didn't get into the slides. I wrote this yesterday. This is called just in time. I suppose since I'm missing something, it's more like an almost in time. Cultures are about people and how they interact. So do what feels good. Oh, I remember what it was. If possible, remember I said a few slides ago that new people coming in are being presented with a culture that has been not necessarily set in stone, but has certainly been hammered out. And it's difficult to get them to feel invested in that. So provide a way for them to provide input to changing it, ways of doing it better. I mean, one thing that doesn't change is change. So if you can get new people to feel that they can have an impact on how the group works, that is a big step. Of course, you want to fence it about with ways that keep people from putting in, saboteurs and submarine spies to change the culture so that somebody can take advantage of you. But if you can get every new person to buy into the idea that it's not just their culture that I'm joining, it's going to become my culture and I can affect it, that is a huge, huge step, because you've gotten a piece of their mind share. And that actually, according to this thing, is pretty close to the end of my presentation. So I'll just put up I'll put up the list of attributions for the photographs I included. Whoops, back. That page about who the hell I am. And I don't know, keynotes usually take questions?
Oh, we're short on
That's right, we're at 9:25. Okay, oh, that's right, I stopped the timer, I didn't. Okay, well, in that case, since I'm not only short but out of time, I wish to thank you most gratefully for your attention, and I hope that this has been at least thought-provoking, if not useful, and you can reach me at well, I can't really point over there, but the last line there shows my Twitter account and my email addresses. You're better off trying the Red Hat address, because for 10 years I answered all mail sent to apache@apache.org, with the result that for a while there I was getting 12,000 messages a day. And that account has very heavy-duty filters on it, so your message might not get through. So try me at the Red Hat address. And I'm always willing to answer questions or help. And don't forget that I have ADD, so you may have to poke me a few times. Do not feel shy about poking me more than once. If you send me mail and I don't respond, don't take it personally. You basically floated off the top of my inbox. So poke me again. And thank you very much for your attention and your time.